I never imagined my own brother could humiliate me in front of everyone I cared about, until that day. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. That evening was supposed to be a proud moment for our family. My father's company had just closed its biggest deal, and I was asked to say a few words. I had spent years working quietly, trying to prove that I was more than just the daughter who inherited everything. I wanted to show that I had earned my place. The room was full, our business partners, relatives, and close friends. Everyone was smiling until Derek opened his mouth. As I stood near the podium, ready to speak, he laughed loud enough for everyone to turn toward him. "Let's hope Rachel doesn't bore us with her management theories again," he said, smirking. The laughter from a few people cut through me like glass. I froze, trying to keep my composure, but I could feel my hands trembling. He didn't stop there. He turned to one of the guests and added, "She might know the numbers, but she doesn't have the brains to lead." The words echoed in my head. No one said a thing. My mother looked down. My uncle awkwardly adjusted his tie. The silence around me was worse than the insult itself. I felt my throat tighten, my chest burn, and my heart drop to the floor. I forced a small smile, pretending it didn't hurt, but inside something broke. I had spent years defending him, covering his mistakes, making sure his bad decisions didn't reach our father's ears. And this was how he repaid me, by tearing me down in front of the very people I'd worked so hard to earn respect from. I took a deep breath and continued my speech as if nothing had happened. My voice didn't shake, but my soul did. Every word felt heavier than the last. I could see Derek leaning back, sipping his drink, proud of what he had done. He thought it was just another joke, another way to remind everyone that he was the real Hayes. I didn't look at him again. I finished my speech, thanked everyone, and walked off the stage with my head high. But inside, I was done. That night, as I sat alone in my car, staring at the city lights, something changed. The pain slowly turned into something sharper, something powerful. For the first time, I didn't cry. I didn't yell or try to explain. I just promised myself one thing. He would never get the chance to hurt me again. I would take back everything he tried to destroy, piece by piece. And when I was done, he'd realize what it meant to mock the wrong person. After that night, I couldn't look at Derek the same way again. The laughter from that evening still echoed in my head, but it wasn't just about the humiliation anymore. It was about everything that had led up to that moment. When I started thinking back, I realized this wasn't the first time he had tried to break me. It was only the first time he had done it so openly. Years ago, when I first joined the company, Derek had already made sure the board doubted me. He spread quiet rumors that I only got my position because I was our father's favorite. When one of my project proposals was mysteriously leaked to a competitor, I knew who had done it, even though I had no proof. He always smiled to my face, but behind my back, he was setting traps. I used to tell myself that's just how siblings are, competitive, teasing, a little harsh. But this was never just competition. It was hate disguised as family. Martin Lewis had seen it before I did. He was my father's most trusted advisor, and like a second father to me after Dad passed away. I remember sitting in his office one day, months before the public humiliation, when he told me, "Rachel, I know you love your brother, but not everyone raised beside you wants to see you win." At the time, I brushed it off. I thought Martin was being too cautious, maybe even unfair to Derek. But now his words felt like prophecy. I spent the next few days avoiding family calls, pretending to be busy with work. I couldn't stand hearing Derek's voice or seeing his name flash across my phone. I felt a kind of emptiness I had never felt before. For most of my life, I believed that family came before everything. But as I sat alone at night, replaying everything Derek had done, I started to wonder if blood really meant loyalty, or if it just made betrayal hurt more deeply. The anger didn't come all at once. It arrived quietly, like a slow fire under my skin. I didn't want revenge out of rage. I wanted clarity, control, and peace. Derek had taken my dignity once, but I wouldn't let him take my sense of purpose. I wanted to build something so strong that he could never shake it again. So I started thinking, not emotionally, but strategically. I reviewed my father's old files, the business agreements, and the financial documents that Martin had once told me to keep safe. I began seeing the structure of our family empire in a new light. For the first time, I noticed how much Derek relied on appearances while I focused on substance. I realized that he might hold the spotlight, but I held the foundation. And that was where I would start. I didn't need to yell, argue, or expose him. I just needed to understand the system better than he did. And when the time was right, I'd move quietly, and he'd never see it coming. After weeks of silence, I finally gathered myself enough to act. Derek thought I was avoiding him out of shame, but the truth was I was studying everything he never bothered to understand. I spent long nights in my father's old study, surrounded by boxes of legal files, trust agreements, and investment reports that most people would find impossible to read. But I wasn't most people anymore. I was patient, focused, and ready. I began by reviewing every part of the family's financial structure. My father had built multiple trusts and partnerships under different names. Derek never cared to understand how any of it worked. He only cared about the lifestyle it gave him. That was his weakness, and it was where I would start. I discovered that several of our holdings were still under clauses that gave me quiet authority if certain conditions were met. Conditions Derek had unknowingly triggered through his negligence. That's when I called Clara Benson, a financial advisor I trusted completely. She had worked with me before, and I knew she valued discretion above everything. When I told her what I planned, she didn't flinch or ask why. She just nodded and said, "If you're ready, we'll do this the right way." Together, we began the slow process of moving small portions of assets, nothing too big to raise suspicion. Each transfer looked routine, harmless, part of normal operations. But behind those small moves, a much bigger picture was forming. Clara worked quietly, making sure every step was clean and untraceable. We met only in person, never at the office. Sometimes in quiet cafes, sometimes at my house late at night. I'd hand her documents. She'd hand me results. Every signature, every clause we invoked, pulled control a little closer to me and a little further from Derek. Meanwhile, Derek continued to play the role he always did. Loud, confident, and careless. He'd walk into meetings bragging about upcoming expansions, pretending to be the visionary of the company. He didn't notice the way people started looking toward me for approval instead of him. He thought I was still too hurt to do anything meaningful. His arrogance became my cover. I made sure to stay calm around him whenever we met. I'd smile politely, listen to his jokes, even let him mock me once or twice more. Inside, I was unshakable. Every insult made my plan clearer. The less he suspected, the easier it would be to take everything he thought belonged to him. At night, I'd sit with my notes, marking each completed transfer. Clara would message me a single word after every move. Done. Those messages felt like quiet victories. Each one brought me closer to the moment I could finally stop pretending. I wasn't rushing. I had learned patience from the pain he caused. I knew that when it was all done, Derek wouldn't just lose money. He would lose the illusion of control he built his whole life around. And when that day came, I'd be ready to look him in the eye, calm and unbothered, while everything he relied on slipped out of his reach. It started slowly, just as I planned. Nothing loud, nothing obvious, just small, careful moves that began to change the balance of power inside the company. Derek was too busy chasing attention to notice that the walls around him were shifting. I had already positioned a few trusted managers and clients close to me. They knew how hard I had worked for the company and were quietly willing to back my lead when the time came. My first move was through the client base Derek thought he owned. I knew the contracts, the renewal dates, and the weaknesses in his relationships. Most of those clients stayed with us only because of the company's reputation, not because of him. With Clara's help, I made sure their trust and communication came directly through my side. When key deals came up for renewal, I offered smoother terms, faster handling, and more security, something Derek had always ignored. Within weeks, 2 of his biggest clients shifted their loyalty to me. He noticed the numbers dropping, but didn't understand why. I could see the confusion in his eyes during board meetings. "Something's wrong with our partners," he said one morning, frustrated. "They're pulling back without reason." I kept my expression calm, pretending to be concerned. "Maybe they're just reviewing options," I replied softly. He brushed it off, blaming the market. That arrogance was his blindfold. Behind closed doors, I felt a mix of emotions. The satisfaction of seeing him lose control was powerful, but it didn't feel as sweet as I thought it would. It hurt in ways I didn't expect. This was my brother, after all. Every time he fell a little further, I felt both stronger and lonelier. Revenge didn't erase the memories of the times we were close. But I couldn't stop. Not now. He had taught me that mercy only gives people like him another chance to destroy you. A week later, we crossed paths in the hallway. He was irritated, snapping at an assistant, his tone sharper than usual. When he saw me, he forced a smirk. "You must be happy now," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The company's slipping and somehow you're smiling." I looked at him, calm as ever. "I'm not smiling," I said quietly, though I was. He scoffed. "You never had what it takes, Rachel. You were just lucky Dad liked you." I wanted to respond, but I didn't. I just met his stare for a few seconds and walked away. Let him believe I was weak. It made everything easier. That night, when Clara called to confirm another transfer completed and another client fully under my management, I looked out the window at the city lights and took a deep breath. Derek still thought he was untouchable. He had no idea that his downfall had already begun, and that every loss he was facing was because of me. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Derek had been working for months on a major business deal with a foreign investor, convinced it would secure his dominance in the company. He boasted about it at every meeting, calling it his big win. What he didn't know was that I had been quietly studying the same deal from the start. Every contract draft, every clause, every financial term passed through my desk for review. And through that, I saw something Derek didn't. The investor preferred long-term stability over flashy promises. That was something I could offer, and Derek couldn't. With Clara's help, I created an alternate proposal, one that aligned perfectly with the investor's real interests. It took careful timing. I waited until Derek delayed a key document he was supposed to sign. That small window was all I needed. I personally reached out to the investor, presenting a plan that not only benefited the company, but also ensured better protection for their funds. I spoke calmly, confidently, and backed every word with numbers Derek could never explain. Within 2 weeks, the deal Derek had been bragging about was finalized, but under my name. The shock on his face when he found out was something I'll never forget. He stormed into my office the morning the announcement went public, holding the signed papers in his hand. "How the hell did this end up under your division?" he shouted. I looked up from my desk, pretending to be surprised. "It was just a matter of timing," I said. "The investors wanted a faster move. I handled it." He glared at me, his confidence cracking for the first time. "You went behind my back," he accused. "No," I replied quietly. "I just did what you didn't." After he left, I sat there in silence, my heartbeat steady but my chest heavy. I had taken the deal that meant everything to him, the one he thought would prove his power. Now it was mine, and with it came control over several key assets tied to the company's growth. For the first time, Derek's influence wasn't just slipping, it was collapsing. That night, when Clara called to confirm that the assets had been legally transferred to my authority, I felt both triumph and guilt. Part of me wanted to celebrate. Another part wanted to cry. This was what I had worked for, but it also meant I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. My father had always believed in unity between us, but now I was taking apart the very thing he built. I sat in my office long after everyone had left, the city glowing outside the window. I thought about how easily Derek had mocked me, how sure he was that I'd never fight back. And yet, here I was, holding everything he once controlled. It should have felt like victory, but all I could think was how far from family we had both drifted. Still, there was no turning back now. The tables had finally turned, and I was ready to keep them that way. After taking control of the deal, I knew Derek would fight back. That was his nature. He couldn't stand losing, especially to me. But instead of meeting his anger head-on, I decided to play a different kind of game. This time, it wouldn't be about business moves or contracts. It would be about perception. Derek's pride lived in how people saw him, and I was going to take that from him too, quietly, piece by piece. I started by revisiting the company's past records, the ones that most people ignored. Hidden in those files were Derek's old mistakes, failed investments, poor decisions, and questionable expenses that had been buried under our family's name. I didn't need to lie or exaggerate. The truth alone was damaging enough. But instead of exposing everything at once, I chose specific moments, shared carefully with select members of the board. Each conversation was casual, natural, almost accidental. I'd mention a detail while discussing company risks, a number that didn't match, or a file that seemed off. They began connecting the dots on their own. It didn't take long for whispers to start circulating. Derek's reputation, once solid, began to shift. People still smiled at him, but I could sense the doubt in their tone when they spoke his name. They started asking more questions, double-checking his work, reviewing deals he had once signed without question. Derek, too busy defending his ego, didn't even realize where the distrust was coming from. To him, it was just bad luck. To me, it was justice unfolding quietly. At night, I'd sit alone, replaying everything he had done to me. The laughter, the humiliation, the dismissive looks, the way he turned people against me. Those memories didn't hurt the same way anymore. They sharpened me. Each time I thought of that night when he mocked me in front of everyone, I reminded myself why I was doing this. This wasn't just revenge, it was balance. He had taken my dignity publicly. I was taking his power silently. There were moments, though, when the weight of it hit me. I'd catch myself wondering if I was becoming just like him. But then I'd remember the years I spent defending him, forgiving him, believing he'd change. He never did. He only grew bolder. So I pushed those thoughts away and stayed focused. I wasn't destroying him. I was revealing who he truly was. One afternoon, I overheard two executives discussing Derek in the hallway. "He's losing control," one whispered. "Maybe Rachel should handle more of the operations." I walked past them quietly, pretending not to hear, but inside, I felt something shift. For the first time, the company wasn't just seeing me as the sister. They were seeing me as the leader. That night, as I looked over my notes, I realized how far I'd come from that humiliated woman who once stood frozen in front of a laughing crowd. I wasn't that person anymore. I had learned the power of silence, patience, and precision, and Derek still hadn't realized that his biggest mistake was underestimating me. The day finally came when everything I had planned came together. Months of patience, silence, and precision had led to this moment. The board meeting was scheduled for a Monday morning. Everyone important was there: investors, partners, senior managers, and Derek, sitting confidently at the head of the table as if nothing had changed. He still believed he was in control, unaware that his empire had already shifted beneath him. When I entered the room, I felt calm. My hands didn't shake, my voice didn't tremble. I had gone over this plan too many times to let emotion take over now. The agenda seemed ordinary on paper, but item number 3 was mine: company restructuring proposal. When the time came, I stood, opened my folder, and spoke clearly. I presented a plan that had been carefully reviewed and approved by most of the board in advance, thanks to the quiet groundwork I had done through the months. The restructuring meant combining several divisions, closing unnecessary ones, and transferring authority to a newly formed executive committee. Derek's position was eliminated entirely. The power, the control, and the financial privileges tied to his title were gone. Every clause had been written legally and properly, leaving him no space to object. When I finished, the room went silent. Derek looked at the papers, confused at first, then angry. "You can't do this," he said, his voice rising. "This company is ours." I looked at him, my tone steady. "It still is. But the rules have changed." He flipped through the pages, realizing too late that his own signatures from past meetings had approved the motions that made this possible. He had signed away his power without even noticing. His face turned pale. "Rachel, please, we're family. You can't just take everything from me." His voice cracked for the first time. The room watched in silence as his arrogance crumbled. I didn't look away. "I didn't take anything," I said quietly. "I just made sure what's mine can't be destroyed anymore." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. He looked lost, smaller than I had ever seen him. But the memory of that night, the laughter, the humiliation, the years of betrayal, stood between us like a wall I could never cross again. I couldn't forget it, and I couldn't forgive it. When the meeting ended, I walked out before he could say another word. The board followed my lead, some nodding, some whispering. Derek remained seated, staring down at the papers that stripped him of everything he thought he controlled. Outside the building, the air felt heavier than I expected. I should have felt victorious, but instead there was a deep ache in my chest. I had won, but it didn't feel like a win. It felt like the final cut in a bond that once meant something real. Family had become nothing more than a memory, and I had just buried what was left of it with my own hands. Once the restructuring was complete, I knew there was only one final step left to make everything secure. The company was under my control now, but a large portion of our family's fortune still sat in a shared trust. One Derek believed he would inherit without question. That money represented power, and as long as he had access to it, he could still find a way to cause trouble. I couldn't let that happen. It wasn't about greed anymore. It was about peace. With Clara's help, I began the process of legally transferring the remaining $400 million into accounts I controlled. Every move was within the boundaries of the trust agreement, backed by clauses Derek had ignored for years. My father had created those terms to protect the family legacy, never realizing one day I'd have to use them against his own son. Clara handled the logistics while I managed the authorizations. Each document we signed was another lock on the door Derek could no longer open. The process took weeks, but it was flawless. Not a single red flag appeared. Not a single objection could stand. When it was done, the full transfer was confirmed. $400 million moved quietly, legally, and permanently. Derek was left with nothing he expected to inherit. His accounts were still there, but the core of the fortune, the control, the real influence, it was all gone. I didn't make any announcements. I didn't gloat or celebrate. I simply went to work the next day as if nothing had happened. The silence was enough. Derek realized the truth on his own when his access was denied, his authority revoked, and his name removed from key accounts. He tried to reach me, calling several times, but I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. For years, he had used money as a weapon. To control people, to buy loyalty, to humiliate anyone who challenged him. Now he had to face the world without it. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could have rubbed it in, but I didn't need to. Letting him sit in silence, knowing I had taken everything he once used against me, was more powerful than any confrontation. That night, I sat in my office, staring at the final confirmation documents Clara had sent over. My hands didn't shake this time. There was no guilt, no hesitation, only quiet relief. For the first time in my life, I felt free. Free from his shadow, from his cruelty, from the endless cycle of proving myself to someone who never wanted to see my worth. I thought about my father and the promise I once made to protect what he built. Maybe this wasn't the way he would have wanted it, but it was the only way to keep it safe. I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and took a long breath. The fight was over. Derek could keep his pride if he wanted it, but I had reclaimed everything else. And this time, I wasn't giving any of it back. After everything was done, the silence that followed felt strange. For so long, my mind had been filled with plans, strategies, and calculations. Now there was nothing left to plan. The company was secure, the money was protected, and Derek had no power left to threaten me. For the first time in years, I could finally breathe without looking over my shoulder. In the quiet that followed, I started to reflect on what had really happened. It wasn't just about business or money. It was about respect, something Derek had taken from me the moment he mocked me in front of everyone. I didn't destroy him to become rich. I did it to stand tall again, to prove to myself that I didn't need anyone's approval to be worthy. I realized the revenge had never been about taking everything from him. It was about reclaiming what he had stolen from me, my dignity, my peace, and my control. Derek didn't fight back publicly after that. He couldn't. The legal ground was solid, and everyone in the company knew where the power truly rested now. I heard from one of the managers that he'd stopped coming to the office altogether. He sold his house, moved out of the city, and started a smaller business on his own. I didn't check on him, though part of me wanted to. I told myself that his pain wasn't my concern anymore. I had spent too many years carrying his weight. This time, he would have to face the consequences on his own. Sometimes late at night, I still thought about the good memories, our childhood, our father's voice, the days when family actually felt like family. It hurt to think about how far we'd drifted, but I knew there was no going back. What happened between us had changed everything. There was no apology that could undo it, and no forgiveness that could fix it. Instead of focusing on what was lost, I started rebuilding what I still had. Clara remained by my side, not just as a financial advisor, but as a friend. She reminded me that power without trust is empty, and she was right. I also began to carry on Martin's legacy, keeping his values alive in how I led the company. He had always believed in doing things with quiet strength, and now I finally understood what that meant. Each morning felt lighter. I spent more time with people who respected me for who I was, not what I owned. The company began to grow stronger under my leadership, and I made sure it stayed grounded in fairness and integrity, values Derek never understood. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the glass wall of my office and think about the woman I used to be, the one who stood frozen in humiliation. She was gone now. What stood in her place was someone calm, composed, and unshakable. I had lost my brother, but I had found myself. And that, in the end, was the only victory that truly mattered. The days that followed felt different, lighter, quieter, and finally mine. I walked into the office each morning without dread, without fear, and without the shadow of Derek looming over me. The woman who had once frozen under his laughter was gone. In her place was someone who had endured betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak, and had come out stronger, calmer, and more certain than ever. I didn't need to announce my victories. I didn't need to gloat or prove anything to anyone. The silence around Derek's absence, the steady growth of the company under my leadership, and the respect of the people who mattered spoke louder than any words ever could. I realized something important. I hadn't destroyed him. I hadn't set out to ruin his life or humiliate him publicly. I had simply reclaimed my life, my power, my dignity, and my peace. At meetings now, I noticed the change in the room. Investors listened carefully to my suggestions. Managers followed my lead without hesitation, and even new clients seemed drawn to the confidence I carried effortlessly. The girl who had once been mocked, ignored, and underestimated by her own brother had become the most powerful figure in every room she entered. That thought no longer filled me with anger. It filled me with quiet pride. There were moments, of course, when I thought about Derek. I imagined him struggling, trying to find footing in a world where he no longer held sway. Part of me felt satisfaction, yes, but I didn't dwell on it. Revenge is hollow if it consumes you. What mattered most was that I had freed myself from his influence, that I had taken control without losing myself in the process. I also thought about the lessons I had learned. Betrayal hurts deeply. It leaves scars that never fully fade. But patience, strategy, and self-respect can transform pain into strength. Every calculated step, every quiet decision I had made over months had built more than just a victory over Derek. It had built a life I could walk into with confidence and peace. On a quiet evening, looking out over the city from my office, I allowed myself a small smile. The memories of ridicule and humiliation were still there, but they no longer had the power to control me. I had turned them into lessons, into fuel for growth. I had proved to myself, more than anyone else, that I was capable of surviving anything and thriving afterward. In the end, the world hadn't just witnessed a takeover of a company or a shift in money. It had witnessed the transformation of a woman who refused to be small, who refused to be silenced, and who refused to let someone else define her worth. I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need my brother's recognition. I had my life back, and for the first time in years, it was completely and beautifully mine.